Does a contemporary artist have a political responsibility?
Well, that was discussed several thousand years ago when Pericles, who was the leader of Athens, came to Sophocles, their greatest playwright, and said, you know, it's your turn to run the postal service, or whatever it was at that time. And Sophocles said, look, I'm busy. I'm writing a play and a poem. Politics is not my business. And the great leader of Athens, the first democracy in the world, said, the man who says politics is not his business has no business. That's my general view.
So if you have artists that respond in that way, does the contemporary artist have any power?
Well, you don't measure power necessarily by whether you become governor of Michigan or wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning play. It doesn't work like that. In times like this, when the whole world can be so easily destroyed, and this planet is, you know, its number could be coming up any minute, due to global warming, which our leaders tell us the jury's still out on that. That jury has been out so long, it must be unconscious by now, as we are constantly lied to. No, I think the duty of the writer, certainly, is to describe what he sees and explain it as best as he understands it. That's his task. Beyond that, people, the more they know, the better they will be, has always been the theory of education. And I don't see any reason to annul it now.
The things you mentioned, sort of things that we ought to be fearing, such as global warming. You know, our modern American media deals a lot in fear. You see murders, cops, investigators, terrorists, things like that on television all the time. That, combined with the basic truth that entertainment celebrities and some authors are nothing but lottery ticket winners, produces a paralysis in people. They just don't believe in achievement, and so they don't take action. As one of our elder statesmen for humanism and rationality, how do you suggest that we revitalize diversity and will to live in American culture?
Well, it's not easy. I mean, we've had two presidential elections stolen back to back, as it were, 2000 and 2004. The press would not tell us, the media tells us really nothing, nor do they intend to. John Conyers, who's a congressman from Michigan, and he's the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee of the House, he went up to Ohio after the last presidential election with a lot of investigators, and he did a lot of work on the electronic machines and how they'd been rigged and who was doing the rigging. He got a great deal of detail together, and he put out a little book that was published in Chicago. And he and I got together, and I wrote a preface to the book, sort of to help it along, certainly on the internet. Here it was, one of the most respectable members of the House of Representatives. The New York Times never mentioned the book. The Washington Post never mentioned it. It was never reviewed that I know of in any newspaper in the country. Whereas any piece of junk out of Hollywood is going to be revered and will have endless stories about the sufferings of the author. But something which concerns the republic, which is dying before our eyes, which is being absolutely got round by this gang that has taken over the government, and now seems to be ready to give us a theocracy on top of everything else. These are dangerous times. Where are the warning voices? The famous canaries in the coal mine. I think they've snuffed out, but anyway. What's left must be heard, and we should start paying more attention.
Those warning voices are out there. I mean, certainly you're one of them, and Conyers is certainly one of them. But they're not being covered in the main media, and people are not paying attention. How do we get folks to engage?
Well, the internet has been helpful in many ways, confusing in many other ways, but certainly there is a chance now of getting information out very, very quickly. And it can be done. These radio stations where people ring in, that's largely been a right-wing toy, but it has now become, for concerned citizens, a way of addressing these matters with our fellow citizens. I think that is all important, and everybody can play a part in that. For instance, also I think with the next election, we should have a poll watchers. They used to in the old days, you know, you have a couple of Democrats, a couple of Republicans. So broken up now, I forget the parties, but just have as honest people as you can find to make sure that Diebold or one of these companies is not rigging the vote as it's happening. The exit polls tell us one thing, and then the final tally is very strange, in fact, often the reverse. This has become a national sport, and the right wing giggles happily over this because they got what they wanted. They want these great officers of state in order that they can give contracts to their friends like Halliburton. And we are just, the average citizen is ripped off, and how we got into this state of passivity, I don't know. This was never a passive people. We may have done wicked things in our past to the indigenous population, but it was an energetic, very self-aware polity that we had. And somehow it's just gone blank. And I think the poisoned media is a big part of it. It keeps you, you know, comatose, basically. It's an instrument of only one thing, is advertising. If not for a political candidate, it's advertising for something you don't need or shouldn't have, or probably don't want. Well, that's not a good way. It's just our only art form, by the way, our television commercials. And that will not leave much trace, unlike the Grease of Pericles, which left more tangible traces than Rinso White.
Well, most people engage, or at least get most of their material in their media from the poison media, as you say. I've also heard you say that there is no room for a novel in our contemporary society because the audience is not paying attention anymore. But folks like Dennis Altman have called you one of the greatest American writers of the last half century and a man of letters. In our contemporary society, is there a place for men of letters, or men who aspire, or women who aspire to be people of letters?
Well, you have to do what you feel you must do. Dennis Altman is Australian and perhaps romantic when he contemplates our once great republic. And it is kind of him to notice what I try to do. Well, there are plenty of people out there to do it. But if Conyers, a powerful congressman, when the Democrats take back the House of Representatives, he'll be the head of the Judiciary Committee. And when the New York Times, which pretends it's a real newspaper, and it isn't. It's a medium for advertising, and lousy advertising, too. It's a paper that's failing, all because of that. It's going to be just pushed off the map by electronic, who knows what, television, and other things. Once a newspaper, that claims to be the paper of record, becomes dishonest, then there's no place for it. And people do catch on eventually. Though I must say that the Russians lived for a long time with Pravda. I made a couple of trips to Moscow in the old days of communism, and everybody was very well informed about what was going on in the world. And they'd all look at their newspaper, Pravda, and they say, oh, what's this full of lies? None of it's true. I said, well, how are you so well informed? Oh, we learned how to read it. You know, you sort of hold it like this, and you lean back, and the truth begins to fall out of the columns, you know. So, well, it takes a lot of energy.
I'm going to get back to the web for a moment, because you said it is confusing. Camille Paglia on Salon says that weblogs represent a diminishing of language, that essentially the writer is a craftsman and an artist, and the blogger is a tree stump a tree stump ranter, essentially. How do we produce a climate for valuable, reflective, informed, and articulate public dialogue when the public is content with a semi-articulate cacophony of opinion on the one hand, and program propaganda from the poison media that encourages paralysis?
It does and it doesn't. You know, the first law of physics is there's no action without reaction. Enough junk gets out there and people get surfeited and people get sick of it, and then they will turn to the real thing. There are plenty of people available who can deliver the real thing, but you have to be interested in it. And it's a sort of electronic trap. I've been watching a lot of American television the last year, because I was in Italy and then I came back. And how they put up with it is beyond me. I mean, it's just Wolf Blitzer. Mr. Vidal, briefly, what is the meaning of life? I'm sorry, our time is up, but nice to see you. You'll come back. Well, this is the higher idiocy that you're getting now. There will come a moment when people just start turning it off CNN. CNN began as something quite hopeful. We all thought, well, it's going to be good. It was for a while, then it wasn't, and now it's party line boilerplate.
I'm going to change subjects here. The rhetoric of America has always been sort of us and them. From the genocide of the natives to the murder of the Mormons, the cruel war in the Philippines to Vietnam, and now the Muslim world. But the American ideal has always been, it's a place of all. So what's going on here? And why is all this exclusion happening in our history?
New theories are boiling up, and I'm still thinking about them. That in order for the Republican Party, which has nothing to offer the people of the country, practically ever since the days of Lincoln and perhaps Theodore Roosevelt, they decided there were a lot of people who had been turned off by secularism and by civilization. And these were the true believers, fundamental Christians. So the Republican Party, led by a man called Richard Viguerie, who raises money in the South, they went after the churches. They went after the pious folk, who by and large didn't pay much attention to politics. And there are not that many of them, but they are in states with very little population, but electoral college votes. So it was a clever plan, was to get all the churches in sparsely populated states like Alabama, Mississippi, and so on. Work not on presidential elections, was give money for people running for sheriff, for smaller offices. Then when you got a presidential election, you'd have enough electors with all of their office holders being represented in the electoral colleges. So it was a clever ploy. It worked. But simultaneously, most Americans don't buy it. They're not Bible thumpers. They're generally rather indifferent to religion or polite about it, or sometimes hostile. Now, watching Bush, who talks to God, it is not known whether God speaks to him, but he's a theocratic president. He speaks in biblical terms all the time. He's in code. He's got coded references to all sorts of crazy books that are out there now, which I've never read, but I've read about them. Well, I've read one or two. And about this is the end time. Armageddon's here. Why repair the roads? Why feed the people? Since we're all going to go to hell or heaven presently. And with lots of wars and insulting everybody so that they will get angry at us and drop bombs on us, as Osama bin Laden did. It's a new technique of governing, but it really is the end time because we're going to be knocked out. We've made too many enemies now. Imagine when the president of China comes. Every day they found a new way to insult him. They wouldn't do this. They wouldn't respond to that. It was just insane. This is a very small country and a very much hated one. And there are a lot of enemies out there. And with these fools, I think of Bush as somebody, a sleepwalker. He's just wandering along, he's dreaming, he doesn't know where he is. He just shouts at people, I'm wartime president, I'm wartime president, I'm wartime president. Well, he's not a wartime president because there's no war. You have to have another country for that. He's doing his best to offend everybody, but so far he hasn't got into a real war. But he has wartime powers to make sure that all of his friends get tax money and big no-bid contracts. This is the crookedest time and the most dangerous time. We can all put up with, the thieves. We've had plenty of thieves in the past. But a thieving, suicidal government is really, I think, more than our Constitution can take.
Talk a little more about the fundamentalism that is behind George W. Bush, and I think probably on the other side of the war we're fighting right now.
Well, the fundamentalism is, what it is it's a rejection of science. It's a rejection of empirical living. And it's the symbol being the rejection of Darwin. As I like to point out, that when you consider George Washington and George W. Bush, it's very difficult to believe in evolution. It makes it a monkey out of Darwin. That we have come from Washington to Bush, and it's only a couple of hundred years. That's a throwback. There are a lot of simple folk out there who've never been educated, and now they may never be. I talk to teachers who have to teach in, say, junior high school, whatever they call now, elementary schools too. Any mention of evolution, and they'll have 10, 12 students coming in with questions to it. How do you know? Do you have a photograph of a dinosaur? How do you know what they look like? Things that their parents and pastors have given them to make sure that they are never educated. This is the terror of the rulers of this country, that the people be informed. Look at the lengths to which they go to smear people. Anybody, say, blowing a whistle, as they call it, on the government will suddenly be accused of adultery, theft, cowardice in the war. This is from real cowards in the war. The yellow roses of Texas, as I call them. It's quite something. They're so busy trying to keep us uninformed that information only comes through, and it's usually rather incoherent is a problem. So a clear message, a clear statement about the State of the Union is really what we need and want. Let's wait till this goes away. This is a technological miracle, this hotel. I mean, keys to get up and down in the lift, and phones that do not seem to connect anywhere at all. Makes you want to pray.
It should give you a greater sense of security. Okay. Carrying on the thoughts that you just had on fundamentalism, it seems like one of the unifying themes in a lot of your body of work up to this point has been the struggle between fundamentalism and enlightenment. And it seems, I think that's becoming more and more prevalent in your current writings.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is a theme and sort of the struggle of the 21st century, who's winning? And what actions can progressives take to ensure the preservation of enlightenment?
Well, I would think the first thing is to have really good monitors, human monitors for the election machinery. Because it is being stolen. It was stolen quite visibly in certain precincts in Ohio. If there had been poll watchers, as there should be at all times, a lot of it could have been stopped. There's that. Then there's the matter of education, which has never been much, well, in fact, is almost non-existent for those without money. So we have a whole kind of new lower class in a way, because we were all more or less educated the same 50 years ago. And I mean, they stopped teaching geography. We become a global empire. 1950, geography is out of the schools. The only time now we need geography when we have bases all over the world and nobody knows where they are or what they're doing. History is a closed subject. It's just propaganda, by and large, as taught in the schools. That's why I spent 30 years writing the history of the United States through novels. And just to get the history out, my history is not fiction, but the fictional characters that I use are the interpreters. I hate it when a historian thinks he's got into the mind of Abraham Lincoln or something. Well, you don't get into other people's minds. Describe what they do, what they do, what they do, and try and determine why they did what they did.
Two more. Following the publication of Three and Julian was Myra Breckenridge. It said I've read reviews that said that this sort of turned a corner in your public image and created a startling and challenging new persona. How significant should the role of a writer's persona be in affecting audience?
Well, I don't see how it can, unless he's going to have his own television program or something, which is, I don't see then how you could write if you were doing a TV program. No, it's, you are what you are, you write what you write. I keep coming back to the verb describe. You describe what you see and what you think is going wrong or right. And that's quite enough. That's a full plate. If you tell the truth about power and money and who does what to whom for what ends, then you're going to have numerous enemies, so you have to have a pretty strong character to survive them. But most of those who have had the nerve to say no are pretty tough and continue, we hope.
In the essay, Interim Report Election 2004, you asserted the United States is now starting to divide consciously between imperialists eager for us to seize all of the world's oil resources and the anti-imperialists who favor peace along with renewable sources of energy. How can Americans heal this divide and create a society based on humanist values, sustainable economics, and rational Republican ideals?
Well, we come back to information, we come back to the media, we come back to education. If they haven't been taught anything, how are they going to come back to anything or go to anything? They're in a daze, and now we see an entire administration that is wandering around in a daze. They don't know what they're doing. And I did a piece for the internet on President Jonah, I called it. If anybody was a jinx, it is this president of ours. Everything he touches is a mess. He can't even get prescription medicine out for the old folks. I mean, just things that you used to press a button and it happened. He just presses the button and, there goes Oahu. No, there is not enough information out there. People can't make up their minds about anything because they haven't been told enough. And what they are told, when the government, somebody, an incredible sum, close to $1 trillion, the Pentagon allegedly has spent on PR. Well, this is, how do you overwhelm that? There are things that can be done, and some of us are talking about making discs and tapes in which you get somebody like Paul Newman to explain about Social Security, why it's not in trouble except from the people who are trying to privatize it and take all the money and put it in mutual funds, to Wall Street. That's a safe bet. If people like that just distributed the discs for nothing, this is what the dreadful Ayatollah Khomeini did. He did his servants living in Paris, had them sent back to Iran for nothing. They were distributed all over the country, and the Shah fell. And he came back and took over, not to the pleasure of many people, but...
With all the information, I don't think, I would say there isn't a lack of information. There's so much information. How do we distill it and seek out sort of the most relevant and the most meaningful? And what gives you hope that we can do that?
Well, there's a lot of things that don't give me hope, which is that most people in the Senate, well, a great many of them, are pretty bright. They know what the score is. Hillary Clinton knows what the score is about a lot of things. But there's certain areas she's not allowed to talk about. Otherwise, she'll lose her Senate seat, or she'll lose the possibility of being elected president. So dissembling is at every level, because there's one group that's just crazy about one subject, another one crazy about another one. It's when people get up the courage, due to what they've learned about the world, to say what they mean, there will be an audience for them. Just that call-in radio and stuff like that. That has an effect. Forget television, because television is not going to reform itself. In fact, I think it's going to get much worse. So, work on the school board. Work on what is taught to kids in school. They want to, you know, the theocrats want everything to be out of the good book. Well, teach some of that, and also teach Darwin, and also teach Jupiter and the great god Krishna. I mean, there are all kinds of things. Let everybody have a general idea of what the world is. People go through life now, they don't know where India is. They don't know what a Hindu is. They don't know what a Buddhist is. They only know about perhaps the latest detergent, which they've seen a lot of on television. Well, the room that detergents take up in the average American brain could be filled with knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you spending the time with us. I think that's the best argument I've ever heard against.
This planet is, you know, its number could be coming up any minute. Due to global warming, which our leaders tell us the jury's still out on that. That jury has been out so long, it must be unconscious by now, as we are constantly lied to. No, I think the duty of the writer, certainly, is to describe what he sees and explain it as best as he understands it. That's his task. Beyond that, people, the more they know, the better they will be, has always been the theory of education. And I don't see any reason to annul it now.
Does a contemporary artist have a political responsibility?
Well, that was discussed several thousand years ago when Pericles, who was the leader of Athens, came to Sophocles, their greatest playwright, and said, you know, it's your turn to run the postal service, or whatever it was at that time. And Sophocles said, look, I'm busy. I'm writing a play and a poem. Politics is not my business. I mean, we've had two presidential elections stolen back to back, as it were, 2000 and 2004. The press would not tell us, the media tells us really nothing, nor do they intend to. John Conyers, who's a congressman from Michigan, and he's the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee of the House, he went up to Ohio after the last presidential election with a lot of investigators, and he did a lot of work on the electronic machines and how they'd been rigged and who was doing the rigging. He got a great deal of detail together, and he put out a little book that was published in Chicago. And he and I got together, and I wrote a...
The things you mentioned, sort of things that we ought to be fearing, such as global warming. You know, our modern American media deals a lot in fear. You see murders cops, investigators, terrorists, things like that on television all the time. That combined with the basic truth that entertainment celebrities and some authors are nothing but lottery ticket winners produces a paralysis in people. And they just don't believe in achievement, and so they don't take action. As one of our elder statesmen for humanism and rationality, how do you suggest that we revitalize diversity and will to live in American culture?
Well, it's not easy. And the great leader of Athens, the first democracy in the world, so the man who says politics is not his business has no business. That's my general view.
So if you have artists that respond in that way, does the contemporary artist have any power?
Well, you don't measure power necessarily by whether you become governor of Michigan or wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning play. It doesn't work like that. In times like this, when the whole world can be so easily destroyed,